Good evening and welcome to Pellowe Talk. I'm Dave Pellowe, and tonight we have a cracker of a show coming up for you. So first of all, we're going to be introducing Brad Rowswell. Now, he is a Member of Parliament in Victoria and the member for Sandringham. Now, he's a Shadow Cabinet Secretary and he's the Shadow Assistant Minister to the Leader of the Opposition. And there's been some things going on in the fair state of Victoriastan lately. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Always great to be with you, Dave. How are you, mate?
Very, very well, thank you. And I have to let the audience know that you and I have worked together before, you serving the people of Victoria, and nearly 2 years ago now, I brought a little tour to your state with Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux, with my partner at the time. It was our first stop, and the good police of Victoria sent me a bill for nearly $50,000 for keeping the criminals outside. And I'm talking about the similar kind of protests we're seeing in America at the moment. It was absolutely riotous, and that's not an exaggeration. There was a couple of hundred riot police needed to stop the Antifa-type domestic terrorists from disturbing a private, conservative political free speech forum. And you managed to be helpful in getting a question on notice. And what was can you remember what that question was roughly in the vicinity of?
Well, Dave, I'm always support another citizen in the
I think we've just lost. We got you back.
Yep. What you were doing, mate, was promoting freedom of speech, and what the Andrews Labor government of Victoria was being typical in their dealings with people like you, and that's trying to limit free speech. Those questions on notice were simply putting on record, asking the police minister if there was some sort of policy that was followed in order to issue those fines in the first place, and whether they will be pursued. And Dave, from memory, you had a bit of a win because you didn't pay, and you haven't been forced to pay either.
Well, yeah, I'd never had any intention of paying. We were happy to take it to the highest court in the nation for its obvious violation of free speech, protected freedoms. But the win that I think was amazing was the police minister admitted that their own legal advice was they had absolutely no authority to charge anybody like me for holding a private event where police were needed to hold lawbreakers out from harming innocent citizens. That's their legislated duty. And so their own legal advice said, don't take this guy on, you haven't got a chance. Not because I'm good, but because the law was against them.
Well, Dave, interestingly, the protests of last weekend, the organisers weren't charged for police presence there, were they? So, clearly the Victorian government picks and chooses who wants to target with these sorts of things, mate.
It is very, very selective indeed, and there's a lot to talk about with corruption in Victorian politics at the moment. But also joining us tonight is Dan Petrie. Dan Petrie's been with us before. This is Dan's Twitter profile. Welcome to the show, Dan. You're an ex-Bloomberg data editor, which basically means you know heaps about economics. Is that right?
I'd like to think I do, Dave, but a very good evening to both you, Brad, and Liz, who are joining us tonight. And yes, I've got a lot to say, certainly on the Australian economy, where we're going at the moment, and some of it, the challenges ahead are considerable, that's for sure.
Yeah, they certainly are. Well, we also do have Liz Storer joining us, and Liz has a we need to add that to the screen. There we go. This is Liz's bio. Liz isn't on social media. She only speaks from a very big platform, her website, and she's the National Director for Advance Australia. And welcome to the show, Liz. So fantastic to have you joining Pellowe Talk Live tonight.
Thanks for having me on, Dave. Always good to be here. And hello, everyone else.
We had a really good chat with Liz on Pellowe Talk, doing a one-on-one interview. If you haven't seen that, it's on the website, davepellowe.com. And among other things, we talk a lot about Advance Australia and introduce the organisation, and in particular, really start talking about nuclear energy, which is something I've got an open mind on, but I'm becoming a bigger and bigger fan So, Brad, you're nodding your head. You think we could at least lift the ban on talking about it?
Well, it works everywhere else in the world, doesn't it, Dave? I mean, we're thinking about a clean energy source, an efficient energy source, inexpensive energy source. Why wouldn't you have the conversation?
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Economically, Dan, does nuclear stack up?
There's certainly there's certainly scope to discuss it. Typically, with nuclear, you do need quite a specific skill set, and getting those skills within Australia is certainly challenging in terms of the energy requirement. Like Australia's overall energy network is still somewhat patchwork. The renewable story for Australia, which sadly has become somewhat politicised in the last decade, has been an incredible achievement, going from really what was a few percent in 2007 to accounting for 20% of the network. But of course, with the nuclear proposition, if you were to replace the coal one, for example, it does allow you to have a guaranteed power supply. And that's ultimately what the big issue really is actually renewables, as wonderful as they are. The economics behind nuclear certainly are challengeable, but they are certainly worth discussing.
Yep. Well, a big welcome to our viewers tonight. Don't forget, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, leave your comments. For a start, say g'day, tell us where you're watching from. We'll make you famous for a couple of seconds, put you on the screen. But we also want to know what you're thinking. Put your comments about the topics we're discussing. And if you've got some questions, we'll show them and maybe be able to include them. Maybe they're better questions than I can think of. We've got a couple of topics to talk about tonight, but the first one I want to actually get Liz Storer from Advance Australia to talk about, and that's the ongoing nature of these protests that just won't go away. I personally find them a transparent agenda to divide the nation. They're clearly Marxist. It didn't work to divide us industrially because capitalism just works. It's good for everybody, and more people do more well with free markets than they do under a centralized, collectivized kind of society and economy. That didn't work, so what else works? They're looking for other things to divide us on and basically pull everything down. And then we have our wonderful MPs defying the laws regarding COVID restrictions and physical distancing and attending these Marxist rallies. Liz, are MPs setting a good example in rule of law?
Rules for thee, but not for me, as the saying goes, Dave. Look, this is the hierarchy of political correctness in action. When these guys have a righteous cause, as the left so often masquerade as having, the laws go out the window because their cause is seen as giving them the moral high ground. And certainly in this environment, after what Aussies have been through in the last few months, mainstream Australia has copped it on the chin for the greater good. People's jobs, their businesses have gone to the wall. Millions of mainstream Australians have made massive personal sacrifices in terms of being unable to attend the funerals of loved ones. Tens of thousands of Aussies have died during this time, obviously not due to Wuhan virus, as I call it, otherwise known as the CCP virus. But so many have done the thing for the greater good, followed the rule of law, and then we've got these MPs who suddenly consider themselves above it all. And for what I say, because the facts say, is a fake cause. If you fact check the platform in which this entire Black Lives Matter, which has been sparked from across the sea, this started in America, and these guys have decided to take up the cause and make it their own. It quite simply doesn't stack up here. If you look at the Royal Commission's report into Black deaths in custody, you just see this simply isn't an issue to be rampaging through the streets, especially during a pandemic, but at all in the tens of thousands. In its 2018 report, the Institute of Criminology found that death rates for Indigenous prisoners have been consistently lower than the death rates of non-Indigenous prisoners since 2003. So we actually know that far more whites are dying in incarceration, and natural causes were the most common cause of death, the second cause being hanging or suicide by other means. The number one cause of incarceration of Indigenous Aussies is, in fact, assault against other Indigenous Aussies. You can't make this stuff up. We've got Indigenous Aussies like Jacinta Price, like Warren Mundine, coming out and stating these facts and saying, if you want to march in the streets, where's your outrage against the assault, particularly the sexual assault toward children in our communities? There's plenty to be angry about, but how about you grab a righteous cause? So these MPs, not only is the cause fake, it's simply more empty virtue signalling by the lefties among them. And it just at a time when now more than ever, it was extremely irresponsible and a massive slap in the face to mainstream Australians who've otherwise done the right thing during this time.
And what about this gentleman, Victorian Liberal Democrat MP David Limbrick, who defended his decision that going to these rallies was something that he was doing his job, that's what he was there for?
Yeah, look, this is what the left do, don't they? I mean, his excuse is an extrapolation of the excuse of the tens of thousands that marched. You know, this cause is worthier. We're doing our jobs as, you know, fellow citizens.
We've just lost your volume there for a second. While you have a fiddle with that technology, I'm going to have a look at this post from the real Mark Latham. About Greens MP Shoebridge, David Shoebridge, complaining one day about police protecting the Captain Cook statue in Hyde Park from being vandalised, and the next day one of his staffers getting in trouble with the police for doing just as that. Have we got your audio back, Liz?
Have you? You tell me. I couldn't tell at this end.
We have. So what's the go with, is there any accountability for the MP whose staffer seems to be breaking laws willingly when he's complaining about police preventing them from breaking those laws?
No, none whatsoever. So Shoebridge was actually very instrumental in the Black Lives Matter rally in New South Wales. His Twitter feed on the day reads like some sort of BLM updates feed. And here we have one of his own staffers defacing Captain Cook, which, besides the fact that just shows up for historical knowledge about Captain Cook, who was actually well known for being good to the Indigenous of the lands that he visited, and
right.
was never once killed a single Aboriginal. But quite beside that fact, here we have a Green staffer vandalising public property at 4 a.m. in the morning. So by then the police had dispersed, the police guarding this statue had dispersed, and she gets to keep her job. Shoebridge has stood by her saying, well, look, it was outside of work hours. So there you go, Australia. As long as you break our laws outside of work hours, the Greens are completely fine with you doing so. And of course, this was just another virtue signal. They didn't want to be seen as not supporting the cause, which is just absolutely pathetic when it's their fake cause versus the laws of our land. And we're talking about elected representatives elected to uphold, make and uphold said laws.
Brad, you have staff, and the staff are paid for by the Parliament and the taxpayer. What kind of consequences should any politician's staffers expect if they're arrested and charged for vandalising public property?
Well, firstly, Dave, I'm pretty selective with who I choose to be on my staff. It's one of the great privileges that MP has, and the first responsibility of any MP and their staff is to serve the people who have elected them. That is our first job. I mean, in the last little while, my electorate down here in Victoria has some 46,000 residents, has about 30% of those who were considered at risk of coronavirus. And my staff and I called some 7,000 households in my own little electorate. My 2.5 staff and I called some 7,000 homes with people aged or considered at risk of coronavirus to ask them how they were, to check in on them to see if they had the supplies that they needed. That is the role of an MP. That is the role of their staff, to put their community, those who put them there, before their own self-interest. And I trust shortly we'll have the opportunity to speak more about those matters, Dave.
Yeah, definitely. We will be coming to those matters. Dan, as a objective, non-partisan, neither left nor right, according to your Twitter bio, should she keep her job? I mean, we're not talking about censorship here. We're talking about like, you broke the law. You didn't just have a bad opinion. You expressed it illegally. Are these laws there for a whim, or are they there to actually show us what's right and wrong? And do we want to be employing criminals in political staffing offices?
Well, the bottom line is, that she's basically being emboldened to break the law. And David Shoebridge, I'd have to say, as a New South Wales MP, is probably one of the least effective in actually getting any meaningful outcomes for his constituents. It's about, every, issue of the day or the news cycle, which tends to be one which the Greens party can align on. And sadly, that's, really being, the hallmark of that political organisation. They tend very much to go for social issues of the day and don't spend the rigour or the time on things that are going to enrich or better people's lives. So look, I actually do believe the staff should not only be disciplined, but should be suspended from a job at the very least. Now, you have to also apply a standard here. Now, if it was me, or if I was working for a politician, and I'd gone out and broken the law and done so with, let's say it had been Bob Hawke's bust, which had been in Ballarat, for example, which had been vandalised over the weekend, the conversation would be very, very different. This is a matter of respect and also for the law. And the fact is, if the law can be treated in such a rather haphazard manner and without any consequence, then it basically opens a very, very dangerous door. So in the case of the staff, she should be disciplined at the very least, not encouraged to break the law further.
Yep, no, completely agree. And people asking in comments, what about Israel Folau? He vandalized his Instagram with a scripture. Well, I don't know why I quoted scripture, but it's not exactly criminal, and it shouldn't be criminal anyway. It turns out, maybe. He did that outside of work hours. Didn't count for his work contract at all. So MJack wants to congratulate you about not being left or right, about being right or wrong. And Michael French, good comment here. How are we letting the ABC, and I'd like to say mainstream media in general, this constant talk about racism seems to be a self-fulfilling prophecy rather than reality. Surely no society has done more in all of the world, let alone human history, to end racism than Western democracies. So anyway, it doesn't seem like the refugee camps leaving Australia, America and England are filling up. It seems to be one-way traffic, the destination of those coming. Want to move on to another topic, and Dan, this one's probably right up your alley, and that is here we go. I need to add that to the stream. There we go. Now we've got you all. And that is the borders of Queensland, still firmly closed. There's a date somewhere way off in the distance where we might be allowed out, and we might let those Southerners back in. But at this stage, Anastasia Palaszczuk, the good Premier, doesn't see any need for tourism in Queensland to have an actual ongoing industry. What damage is this going to do, Dan?
Look, I look at one catastrophic. That's a simple point. Now, the Gold Coast is a region which, its gross regional product is $40 billion just in that SA4 area alone. It's a linear city. It's not just a tourism sector. It's also, it's more of Queensland's gateway to Asia than Brisbane is, because, so many of the events are hosted, so many conferences are done on the Gold Coast. And of course, it's a gateway through, upon which a lot of the international students which study in Queensland study, in fact, on the Gold Coast. And so this idea that, now in northern New South Wales, there's actually no active corona cases. So why would you have a border closure in place? We're talking now $2 billion is almost undercooking it, because 70% of that economy alone is on that services sector. And it's not just when we talk about services sector, we're talking about, the Gold Coast has become quite a sophisticated economy. There's light manufacturing at the back of the Gold Coast. There's also movie tech, which is also having quite a profound impact on the multiplier effect of skilled people working in that city. It's also a big exporter in terms of a number of there's a place called I forget, it's called Leggings and Lace, something like that. It is a huge exporter of wedding dresses, funnily enough. But you're actually shutting down the 6th largest city in Australia with no economic modelling. You're actually going against the advice of Australia's preeminent epidemiologist in this space, Dr. Peter Kelly. And you've done so based on the advice of your own chief medical officer, who is not in the same league, respectfully, as Dr. Kelly. And he is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer nationally. And so this makes no sense, none whatsoever. And so you've also missed that crucial window of the July school holiday periods. And now there seems to be this theory about, that the southern states aren't doing enough. Australia has natural advantages. Natural advantages in a subtropical environment where a virus will not actually survive anywhere near the same rate it will, in where the average temperature is 18 degrees in New York State, for example. So you've had sadly, and I've met the Premier on occasion and the opposition leader. I do think it's the right call to open the borders, not next month, but immediately. This is catastrophic, and not from the point of view just of the human cost is significant. We're not talking about the suicides. We're not talking about the mental anguish which goes with this. This is a terrible, terrible decision, and it doesn't just affect the Gold Coast. It affects the entire, state of Queensland. And so the idea of shutting borders when we have a low case rate and we've already got the infrastructure in place to address any, infections if and when they arise, is just madness on a grand scale.
Absolutely. What do you think about the impact of excluding New Zealand opportunities for all of Australia with what Winston Peters had to say?
Well, there's another thing. The New Zealanders basically occupy some of the highest levels of property ownership too on the Gold Coast. That's the other point I should have made. Winston Peters made a very good point that it was the problem of federalism and some slow states, and he was making the reference, of course, to Queensland. Now, and then there was another thought bubble which came from the Queensland government about the idea of having a Queensland-New Zealand travel bubble. I mean, like from a sovereign risk point alone, in terms of your reputation, in terms of your ability to invest and wanting to do business and commerce, you've got one area of Australia, like one state, which was once part of the colony of New South Wales, but that's another story altogether, that have decided that they're going to have a border closure, a one-way border closure in place for an arbitrary line through a population centre between the Coolangatta and Tweed Heads, is absolutely crazy. And and it's a political own goal, but more importantly, I mean, it basically says to our nearest neighbours, in terms of New Zealand, where we could actually get some economic activity going. I could actually fly to New Zealand under that proposal, then fly to Sydney. It would be a 9-hour round trip, but that's how stupid this is.
Yeah, crazy. Now, what do you think about this assertion in the Advance Australia write-up a little while ago that this is going to cost Premier Palaszczuk at the election in October? Do you think this is that dramatic an impact on her popularity and election potentials, given the election is still a long way away, 3 months, 4 months?
The state governments, no matter what their persuasion, oppositions don't win. They tend to be kind of, bequeath the responsibility of government if the electorate's not happy with the incumbent. Now, Anastasia Palaszczuk, has, pulled off quite a remarkable win. People can debate, the accidental premier, but the fact is she got the proverbial chocolates. Now, the bottom line is that going into this whole, COVID pandemic, Queensland is one of the worst performing states on every key economic indicator. Business confidence was poor going in. Australia, the state's unemployment rate has been north of mid 6.5s for quite some time. The level of business investment, private sector investment across the state has halved, and you actually are getting quite, and the state's also been in drought. And so you have a very weak economy, and you've got a large tract of their economy told that it's okay. People are praised for going to a protest in Brisbane. 30,000 people going to a protest is okay. But a person who's possibly considering suicide is on the coast or is in because they can't open their business.
Yeah.
And so at some point you actually, does it play well for the Premier? It's going to be a political negative. And this jingoism which tends to come out from Queensland premiers, doesn't matter who it is, either side. Campbell Newman did it for a time. Peter Beattie used to do it a lot. Queenslanders, we're all tough. We're fat suburbanites. Let's just kind of get that out there. The key thing is, the key thing really at the moment is our economy, particularly in this part of Australia, is a farm and quarry economy. If it's not firing, we've got problems. Yeah. That's just the bottom line. And whether the Premier likes to admit it or not, if we don't start talking about the economy, we're in major strife.
Yep. Brad, what do you think? I'm actually interested in, taking the pulse of what do politicians in Victoria generally think. Are you all laughing at Queensland still having their borders closed? Because on the other hand, Victoria was pretty oppressive with some of their restrictions compared to the other states.
I'm all for Labor premiers getting their voters offside, Dave, especially when an election's in the wind, and long may that continue in Queensland. The greatest tragedy of this, of course, is that there are businesses in Queensland, tourist operators, to borrow a phrase from the Prime Minister, losing their livelihoods, and as you've pointed out, potentially their lives as well. I mean, this is serious business. This is not some sort of political plaything that should be decided in the ivory towers, far removed from the reality of day-to-day life in our community. Businesses are hurting. Mum and dad businesses are hurting. And as Liz pointed out, we've done really well. As a community, we've done really well, and we've pulled together. Don't forget, Anzac Day was cancelled. Mother's Day was cancelled in Victoria. There were families who were not allowed to go and visit their dying loved ones. Like, this isn't some sort of fantasy or fable. This has been the reality of our lives here in this country for the last few months. And yet it's somehow okay for a whole lot of people protesting to gather together. Now in Victoria, there were 3 $1,600 fines issued to the protest organisers. But to put it bluntly, Dan Andrews, the Premier down here, was absolutely weak. When we were putting questions to him, asking him, why can't people go and play golf? I mean, you can go social distance and play golf. Why can't people fish? Why can't people undertake recreational fishing, even by themselves, isolated from anyone else? He said, quote, "No round of golf is worth someone's life." Now, that is very strong language. You can't get stronger language than that. But when it came to this protest, he turned around and said, "Oh, well, people shouldn't be going. It's a bad thing to do. We shouldn't be." And there was language no stronger than that. I mean, we are still under a state of emergency here in Victoria. If the Premier and his government wanted to stop this thing, they could have. And the point could have been made. I'm all for people wanting to protest. Whether I agree with the issue or not, I'm not going to take that away from a fellow Australian. Yep. And then we can argue the toss about whether this was a worthy cause or not. But the point is, their cause could have been conveyed in a safer way in recognition of the sacrifice that so many have undertaken these last few months. And when we said that this protest shouldn't go ahead and that Dan Andrews should do everything in his power to stop it, we weren't just being selfish sods thinking about our own self-interest and our own health concerns and that of our families. We were deeply concerned were the people who were turning up to the protest themselves. Because, you know, I'm not a health expert, but as I understand it, those Indigenous Australians are at greater risk of contracting coronavirus than others. Now their health was at risk in attending this. Now, David Limbrick, the Liberal Democrats' upper house member, attended it. There's now been 2 confirmed cases of coronavirus that have come out of that protest. And guess what? The Victorian Parliament's sitting this week, Dave, and David Limbrick is sitting in the chamber with upper house colleagues. That is a
one of the previous comments we had asked if those people were going to be excluded from Parliament because of the necessity to. I think they should. I think all of those people should be mandatorily quarantined, just like somebody returning from overseas. You've said there were a couple of people who were positive for COVID who were in that march. We don't know how far it's spread. So, yeah, absolutely crazy. Look,
I do want to move on. When a lawbreaker breaks the law in Victoria, as David Limbrick chose to do, he is now choosing to put at risk other colleagues in the Victorian Parliament. And he hasn't even been fined. What sort of signal does that send to every other law-abiding Victorian? I thought everyone was equal under the law, but clearly in this state that is not the case.
David Limbrick actually asked a really good question at one of the hearings where he was talking to the Chief Medical Officer of Victoria, and I played a clip from it and used it as a basis in one of my articles where the CMO admitted that the law was arbitrary. Limbrick got him to admit that the difference between they basically said that you don't need to go for a game of golf because it doesn't get your heart rate up, so it's not deemed essential exercise. And David said, well, what's the difference between that and going for a walk, which is deemed essential exercise? And the CMO said, well, there's some arbitrariness in some of these things, which just makes all the sacrifices that the community has made just an outrage after a Marxist protest gets the green light, and everything else in the state, Mother's Day, Anzac Day, churches, and all of these other really, really important freedoms that we should be enjoying get violated. But no, a Marxist march. I don't know why David Limbrick was he in support of Black Lives Matter, the organisation?
Who knows, mate? Who knows? But you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, does it? I mean, he rocked up. He put himself at risk. He put others at risk by turning up to Parliament this week. A lawbreaker has broken the law and there's no consequence. That sends a shocking message to everyone else.
Yeah, it really is. I want to thank everybody for joining and tuning in. We're going to be going past 9 o'clock tonight, but we'll be wrapping up the show formally just before then. And I encourage you to not only join the conversation right now, but why not invite a friend? Share it on your Facebook, on Twitter, and get some people to watch with you and let them know that Not Q&A is the place to get some in-depth, great conversation about the issues that matter. So the Meeks has left a comment, which is interesting. How ridiculous is this colonial brewery saga? I'm going to have to Google that. I'm not sure I'm aware of it. Anybody on the panel know what the colonial brewery saga is?
Oh, mate, I tweeted about this earlier today. This is madness defined. So there are a portion of our community that think that because the beer brand name is named Colonial, that it shouldn't be supported. I've taken they've got a brewery in Port Melbourne here. I've taken my family there. I've taken my kids there. We've met up there with other families. It's great Aussie beer, great Aussie food, and a great family-friendly environment. This epitomises precisely where our community is at the moment.
Yep, this is just sheer insanity. Like, we could talk about this forever. It's
racist. Even beer now, everything is racist. Racist beer.
It reminds me of that Oprah gif. You're a racist. You're a racist. You're a racist. It's just they've done a disservice to dialogue about racism, because now the word's lost all meaning. It's lost all potency. I don't care if you call me a racist. It means nothing. I know it's not true. I know I can't convince you otherwise. It just proves you're an idiot and you're not interested in a facts-based civil conversation. So call me whatever name you want. But how unfortunate then that we can't accurately apply that to people whose behavior and beliefs are actually obnoxious, are actually racist, and believe there's some kind of superiority for one race over others. That's terrible. That conversation, which should be important when true, is now completely diluted to the point of beyond the point of usefulness. Just before we move on to the next topic, I want to invite everybody to join Pellowe Talk, become a partner, head to davepellowe.com, get newsletter updates. There's great conversations happening there, great articles, etc. And there's a lot more growth and change is going to be announced on the Pellowe Talk platform over the next week or two. So stay tuned for that. It's about to get really, really exciting. If you think Tuesday night is fantastic, wait till we start bringing you more and more and more shows from other thought leaders from the conservative side, and even some people who don't really care about left or right. Hey, Dan.
I just good policy, but like strangely enough, I'll say one thing about people who lean right versus people who lean left. Far more polite on the right than they are on the left, and that's just my experience.
And you know what? I want to counter that with some shame and embarrassment that there's a whole bunch of people on the right who are starting to imitate the most uncivil and insincere conversations out there and just abuse instead of argue coherently. And let's encourage you. Look, I'm like you. I'm not interested in left or right. I have the Bible and the Word of God as my moral compass, and whatever aligns with that, that's where I'll be. And that probably hints to the conversation we're going to have in just a minute, Brad. So anyway, there's a few comments here I want to show. Keep the comments coming in. And Dylan Oakley, oh no, I hope they don't attack the wild colonial boy. There's just so much. It's a full-on attack of the culture. And if you don't recognize that the Black Lives Matter movement is inherently anti-everything, you're actually severely deluded. You're what Lenin called a useful idiot. You're supporting an agenda you don't even know it exists. It's just Martin Isles had a really great video tonight. I encourage you to watch that on the ACL website. It's about 20 minutes, I think, talking about the true agenda behind Black Lives Matter. And it's just like all the other slogans that the left throw at us, which mean the opposite of what they actually do. And if you don't agree with the sentiment on the face of it, despite the evil agenda behind it, you're automatically discarded as a person and a character. And so, yes, we can agree Black Lives Matter, but that doesn't mean we're going to use that slogan because it represents a horrible, horrible agenda. So, Brad, what is going on in Melbourne? What is going on? 60 Minutes had this really great expose, and this handsome gentleman from the great state of Victorian has basically been caught. It appears, I don't know if we still have to use the word alleged, but plenty of evidence seemed very suggestive that he's a very corrupt individual, and I guess he has to have his day in court. But tell me, summarize this story for us, for those who haven't been watching the news.
Dave, Daniel Andrews has been leader of the state Labor Party in this state for the last decade. It's on his watch and under his leadership that Labor internally has become clearly rotten to the core. You've got ministers of the Crown who, on earning a six-figure ministerial salary, are prioritising their own political interests over the interests of the community. You've got Adam Somyurek, you've got Robin Scott, who resigned today after they received the backing of the Premier yesterday. You've got Marlene K. Roos, who resigned today, who yesterday received the backing of the Premier to stay on. You've now got three key ministers, former key ministers in the Andrews Labor government, who are not taking responsibility for their portfolios anymore. And this is just, I suspect, the tip of the iceberg. Further, this is an ingrained culture within Labor. Rorting is an ingrained culture within Labor. Ahead of the 2018 state election, you saw MPs sign pay slips for electorate staff without the pay slips being properly filled out with details of the employees' names or the hours that they worked. And what's worse, once they were filled out after the fact, these staffers weren't undertaking electorate-based work for the people, but they were undertaking party political work on the coin of the Victorian taxpayer. I can talk about many other scandals. I mean, in the last parliament, there was a former state Labor minister here, a guy named Steve Herbert, who used his taxpayer-funded limousine to chauffeur his pet dogs up and down the Hume Highway. I mean, this is, there was a Labor's deputy speaker in the last parliament was using the second residence allowance, which he was claiming, but in fact he was living in a caravan. You couldn't make this stuff up. Now, I'm old school, I'm old-fashioned, although I'm the youngest member of the Liberal party room here in Victoria, and I was only elected at the 2018 state election, but I genuinely believe that politics, that elected representatives are there to serve someone else. They're there to serve the people who put them there. We talk about this thing called public service. Well, think about that. That is our role. Our role is to put others before our own self-interest. That's what guides me. That's what guides a number of my colleagues, and long may that continue. But unfortunately, for Victorians on the Labor side, they seem more interested in feathering their own nests and securing their own political futures than they do care about serving the interests of Victorians. And that is a great indictment at the feet of Daniel Andrews, who's been Labor leader for the last decade.
Liz, is it believable when Dan Andrews says he knows nothing about this? This is the first he's heard of it, and oh my goodness, there's some corruption in an isolated pocket of the Labor Party. Did he really not know branch stacking was a routine practice in the Labor Party?
Yeah, please. Look, not only that, but Somyurek is Premier Daniel Andrews' man. The guy controls, as was exposed by 60 Minutes, good job, guys, the guy controls 2/3 of the Victorian Labor Party. To suggest that the Premier wasn't aware of just how much power this guy wielded, and wasn't, dare I say, a party to it in some way, shape or form is just absolutely ridiculous. Please save us the innocent face, quit acting like a deer caught in headlights, and now getting up and signaling, I've sacked him, guys, it's all over, I'm digging out this cancer. Oh my goodness, the cancer will not be gone until that Victorian Labor government is once and for all loses its stronghold on that state. This is sheer corruption, out and out. Men like this should not be in politics. Guys like Somyurek, we already knew he has a really bad track record. He was given a ministerial spot after a suspended jail sentence, I understand. Then he was stood down from the ministry for treating his female chief of staff like rubbish. And then he made it back in only for this now to unfold. This is the kind of situation that once again just keeps nailing home to mainstream Australians, the people watching at home, that politicians can't be trusted, that politics is an unintegrous profession, and it's really sad. It's more and more instances like this that get everyday Aussies thinking, and leaving them with less and less trust in such institutions, both state and federal. It's a really sad state of affairs.
Dan, with the obvious exception of present company who won their seat in 2018, how did the Victorian Liberals lose in 2018 to this bunch of corrupt politicians?
Well, I mean, I did cover politics for a time, so I will put the old hat on for a bit. I think one thing at the time, I remember the Liberals campaign pretty heavily on law and order, and that was an issue, in the community. But I think Andrews had he certainly had momentum. That was certainly from if you look at the political cycle, he had momentum going into that 2018 league, and it's a very presidential style. But like to the point about what Liz was saying, that in a lot of ways, like I lived in New South Wales during the state Labor Party there, and I'd say they're probably the worst administration I've seen in my lifetime. And I grew up in Queensland as well, so the Nats and their death throes were pretty horrible. But the New South Wales Labor government was pretty awful. But I think in the Andrews case, he ran a very presidential, wanting to build all these things. And the other thing too is it's very hard to combat when your state is in rude health. I mean, Victoria's got high levels of private sector investment, and so that's very difficult to combat when you're in opposition. So I mean, the one thing though is that voters don't take kindly to politicians who who use the purse for personal fiefdoms, and I suspect that this will cause quite a lot of political damage, and it'll be a negative for Dan Andrews. But it's surprising. It's almost like history repeating himself. I know now that he's written to the National ALP executive, wanting to suspend, the constitution of the Victorian ALP, and he's taking on his own party. It's a strategy which worked for Peter Beattie, but this style over substance eventually, it catches up with you, and so eventually he will have to go back to the thing, and it's the knitting. That's people's lives, their livelihoods, and Victoria gets a big shake sooner or later, and his ministers have been basically feathering their own nests. It's the electorate tends to come pretty hard after people like that, no matter what their political persuasion.
Yeah. Brad, what do you think about this question from Michael French? Who set them up? Those recording devices were well and truly in place for a great deal of time. Any thoughts on that interesting question?
I'm not an ALP. I'm many things to many people, Dave, but I'm not an ALP insider, so I'm not even going to attempt to answer that question, nor pretend that I am. That's outside of my scope of expertise. But frankly,
we just lost your audio.
I don't really care how the we're back.
Yep.
Awesome, mate. I don't really care how these recordings came about, who the mole in the ranks were. It doesn't matter. These guys have been exposed for who they truly are, and they've got to be held accountable. Now, the sad thing about this accountability question is that the next opportunity for the Victorian electorate to hold this corrupt Labor mob to account is in November 2022. November 2022, more than 2 years away.
Well,
it's just shocking.
That actually then does bring me to this article. Daniel Andrews has asked federal Labor to take over Victorian pre-selections. Now, the takeaway from this article is that branch stacking is going on in Labor. So essentially, the will of the members, the grassroots members, those people who the lifeblood of the ALP, if we're expected to believe their rhetoric, they've had their voice diluted by branch stacking, if not corrupted. And now we have Daniel Andrews basically saying that until January, what does this say? It's going to be 3 years. That for the next 3 years, he wants to suspend the voting rights of every member. Nobody, no grassroots members gets any votes at all. Is it really going to take them 3 years to clean up the Victorian Labor Party?
Dave, clear message here is if you are interested in playing an active part in the political process, if you believe in freedom, if you believe in reward for effort, and you are a Victorian, join the Liberal Party. We will still have grassroots pre-selections held before the federal election, before the next agreement with the Chinese government. And now he's seeking to adopt one of the communist traits and restrict the freedom of his own Labor Party membership in their participation in the pre-selection processes within his own Labor Party. This is, some people have been questioning whether we should be calling him Dictator Dan or Chairman Dan. Well, after this little incident, I'm leaning squarely on the side of Chairman.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dave, can I jump in for a second and ask Brad? Please. I mean, it's, to me, just as an outsider looking in, to me, this is an extraordinary amount of power to grant one state MP, admittedly he's the Premier, but for the federal executive to take over in Victoria, I mean, I know it's electorally a stronghold for that, but to me, this is almost unprecedented. Having a state Premier ask the federal executive to silence the party, which has really delivered, if anything, the greatest electoral gains for that party in the last, certainly in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, the federal executive have also appointed two former Labor MPs to oversee a review of the Victorian Labor Party here, because, of course, who is best to review a corrupt system but your own ALP members? Like that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? You've got Steve Bracks, who has a vested interest in the success of Labor because he's on the board of a Labor-aligned law firm here in Victoria. He's one of the blokes heading up the review. He is absolutely conflicted because, and yet he's appointed. Then you got Jenny Macklin as well, and I won't go into Jenny's sins, but this is absolutely. You're right, Dan. This is unprecedented power that this bloke is exercising over Labor Party members, but that's the way they operate.
Now, I don't want this to be a completely free kick for people not affectionate for the Labor Party. I think it's fair to say, if we can be surprised that Dan Andrews doesn't know how widespread this is going on in the Labor Party, then there's going to be other electorate offices in the Labor Party, and there's also going to be electorate offices in the Liberal Party who are misusing, at the very least, government publicly funded staffers who are meant to be serving the electorate and who are otherwise serving the party's interests as opposed to the people's interests, and doing so to build their own factions and power base. Liz, are you aware of this being, if not quite as common, still far from unheard of on the right of politics?
Oh, look, I think branch stacking is far more common than anyone would like to admit. And it depends also how you define that, because some people would say, you and I are the member of the same party, you and I are standing for the same seat. So you sign up all your friends and family, I say you're branch stacking, I do the same, and you accuse me of the same. This is, of course, a very unique situation in which this guy had literally hired people, was using taxpayer money to hire people to do this dirty work for him. But when it comes to Liberal Party members simply signing up people of like minds, friends and family, that kind of thing happens all the time. Today we saw the opposition leader.
But that's not branch stacking. That's just recruiting people of like minds to support the party.
Depending. So when we talk about fake members, people can sign up friends and family who may have very little idea what they're doing there, but they're there.
Oh yeah, that would be branch stacking. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So there you go. But that is something that's extremely common. Today we saw the opposition leader in Victoria asked point blank, can you guarantee this isn't going on in the Liberal ranks? And kudos to him, he didn't, because he couldn't. So he just kept referring back to the fact, well, look, this isn't about us. It's the ALP that have been exposed to this, and certainly they've never been known to do anything to that extent. The journo did refer to the fact that back in 2017, the Libs in Victoria were under the same allegations about branch stacking, with using Christians and Catholics to stack out different branches. So I must say, I think it's a lot more common on both sides of politics than people might like to believe. But as someone who's been a staffer, I've worked for 3 different members of parliament back in the day, some federal, some state, upper house and lower house. And I was very much involved in the party at the time. Any staffer worth their salt knows full well you cannot spend a single minute of your work day working on party affairs, much like fundraising. It has to be kept completely separate. So, this is where we see the true corruption and the true nature of the operation that was going on here, that it literally not only co-opted existing staffers, but actually hired staffers to do this work, and in doing so committed a criminal offence.
Dan, I know of Liberal Party officers that use their staffers for party business and for promoting the party and recruiting members. Do you think this is widespread on both sides of politics, or nowhere near as bad on one side?
Well, I don't know how to. This is a classic thing where I will be down the centre, but like when I was, like providing the Chamber of Commerce here in Queensland, with the media advice and how to do that, and I often have to deal with both sides of politics. And Labor's certainly probably organisationally has a lot more resource and probably has a lot more invitation, particularly if they hold the tiller to do it. But it's ever present, I think, across both parties. I think it's a cancer, but at the same time, it's also part of the challenge too. I mean, how do you get people engaged properly in the political process? I mean, I actually probably more start to fall in the line there. I actually think taxpayers should fund political parties, mainly to kind of remove the incentive to have these types of practices. But again, in saying that, then
so did you say you think taxpayers should or should not fund the parties?
I have sympathy for that. The idea of having fully funded taxpayer. I forget the legislation exactly, but it's where to reform the AEC Act, where your political parties are effectively funded by the amount of votes they get. So like an extension of what's happening now, where they get some, where it's like if they get a minimum of 4,000 votes, they start to earn something 80 cents per vote, and that's how they get their funding. And that the idea is so that they run proper organisations that are fully audited and follow due process, because by and large a lot of these organisations, the Liberal and Labor Party, rely heavily on donors, and no matter who's in power now, particularly in Queensland and of course in Victoria, the rules are skewed very heavily towards that unions can donate quite generously to that side of politics, whereas a property developer or someone in the private sector business, like what they could actually donate to the Liberal Party or the National Party or the Liberal Democrats is curtailed to a point. So I have sympathy for that point of view, but at the end of the day, I'd like to see people joining parties and having as Brad was saying, that ability to have proper community style elections. But I do think branch stacking, as whatever you want to call it, having like-minded people join is something we just have to live with. If you want to be part of the political process, you need to take people with you, and that's how it really starts. You have a Fonzie, and Ralph Malf, and the rest of the gang follow. That's really how it happens.
Yeah. Look, I'm just going to wrap it up here for the sake of the YouTube video. We're going to cut this off at an hour. If you're watching this on YouTube later after the live stream, make sure you tune in next time at 8 p.m. Sydney time on YouTube and Facebook. That's facebook.com, youtube.com/Dave Pellowe. And this conversation's going on for a lot longer yet. So if you are watching, don't go anywhere. But I just want to thank our panelists tonight, Liz Storer, Dan Petrie, and Brad Rowswell. Thank you very much for being on Pellowe Talk.
Thanks, Dave.
Pleasure, Dave.
Now, Brad, were you just going to jump in there before I wrapped up?
I was just going to say on Dan's point, we actually have that system in existence here in Victoria, Dan. It was the Labor government ahead of the last state election that brought in a system whereby political parties were given state funding for based on the amount of votes that they got. And historically, it was something like $1.50. It was actually lifted to about $6 a vote. Now, that system's in place here in Victoria at the moment. That didn't stop Adam Stomby, Rick. It is the corruption within this Labor Party goes much deeper, and no matter what system you have in place, if it's ingrained in the culture that Dan and the comrades have been overseeing for the last decade, then it's going to take a lot more than Steve Braxton, Jenny Macklin to give it a tickle over the next 3 months.
Yeah. Hey, we've got Meek Scroon commenting a little bit tonight, and she's actually going to be one of our guests on the panel in 2 weeks on the 30th of June. That's going to be a great evening. Meeks is the State Director of the Australian Christian Party in Western Australia. Another Westerner like you, Liz. I believe you two know each other. Bump into each other in the political activism scene every now and then.
We do.
There's a couple of comments here I just want to address. And this one from Aaron Smith. What a coincidence. I think Liz earlier in her comments was referring to an article about Mormon influence rising in the Liberal Party. And Mareka Rancy commented, politics is not for the faint-hearted. People need to keep their eyes open and be aware that it can be pretty dirty. But the sad truth is, if you want to change policy and actually change the direction of our nation, you can't do it from the sidelines. To change policy and lawmakers, you will get to change the policy and the law. You have to engage in the political process. So the comment about Mormons and Catholics were also, accused of branch stacking, essentially. And there's a lot of that conversation going on about both Queensland and Victoria. And there is definitely a concerted effort amongst Christians and conservatives generally to join the party that best represents them, which is more often than not going to be the Liberal Party or LNP in Queensland. Now, joining en masse is not branch stacking. Joining en masse and not really knowing much about it and then doing whatever somebody else tells you to, that is branch stacking. The right reason to join a party is because you want to support the party's chances at election. You want to help make the party better. You share some values with them, and you want to be involved in the process, not be somebody else's puppet. That is what we need more of in Australia. We need people who can't be controlled by an Adam Sonyerick or anybody else of any kind of faction leader. Look, join a group, join a faction, and form some strength together to achieve things. I think that's good. But you can't make any change from outside the party. And so the best way, as Mareka is saying, to make sure that we have the best people to vote for come election time is to join the party and be involved in those people. Might only be 50 people who decide who the candidate from that party is in that electorate. Might be 100 people, but there's a lot smaller percentages required, a lot smaller number of votes required. You can actually be one of 100 people instead of one of 100,000 people deciding who the next member of parliament is in your electorate. An active recruitment drive for people just like you to be genuinely and sincerely involved in growing the party and what's the word I'm looking for? Revolutionizing its direction. We've seen the left do this to our great parties, our institutions, our university, our academia, and even our churches. Progressive agendas are invading them and taking them over, and they're playing by the rules and they're playing a long game. And if conservatives are tired of being frustrated about losing the culture war, then we just have to play by the rules back. Get in and play by the rules. Don't branch stack. Genuinely spend your own money, genuinely make your own decisions, and genuinely group with like-minded people to have an influence and revolutionize those existing power structures and hold them accountable. Brad's been saying it all night. They work for us. You don't have to do what you're told. Just because you're a member of a party doesn't mean you have to vote for them or donate for them. You're there to influence them and help make them better. And at the end of the day, vote for the best candidate in the electorate, even if it's not from the party you genuinely support. Brad, what are your thoughts on factionism in parties?
Dave, politics is not a spectator sport. if you want to, it's far too often do I hear people around the edges of politics and decision making saying, "Oh, that's terrible. Oh, that's shocking. Oh, and another thing. Oh, that's also terrible. Oh, that's also shocking." And very often, and I would be doing myself, my party, and my beliefs a disservice so I didn't have this conversation with people. I say to people, well, politics is not a spectator sport. If you genuinely believe that you can make a difference, that you have an opinion that is worthy of consideration by an elected representative, and you want to feed actively into that process, put your money where your mouth is. Sign up. And, the bottom line is that political parties need members. They need members not just to survive, but to also advance their cause, their ideological cause. From a Liberal Party perspective, we're not here to pussyfoot around. We're not here to gather in small branches and talk about the minutes from the last meeting. We are here to win government. That is our purpose, because we think we can do it better than the Labor Party, because we think that our ideas are better than our opponents. And the conversations that I have, there are many people that I meet that have great ideas that are ideologically aligned to our way of thinking. And so I would be doing myself a disservice and them a disservice if I didn't ask that genuine question, have you thought about signing up? Now, in terms of factions, Dave, I mean, I'm sympathetic.
Brad, let me interrupt you just there, because I like the thought you're on, because it speaks to this question, and we'll come back to the factions one. I do want to hear your answer on that. But Pamela wants to know, I still need to be convinced to join the Libs in Victoria. Brad, what can you say to me, a Christian conservative?
Pamela, I am also a practicing Christian. I joined the Liberal Party because I believed that the Liberal Party shared my values. I'm a person who respects life. I'm a person who respects reward for effort and who promotes freedom. Those are core and fundamental to my belief system. I'm a person who believes in the foundation of our community, the foundation of our society, being the family. Those are my values. I think that they are shared by the Liberal Party and in the Liberal tradition. If those are your values, Pamela, sign up.
Now, factionism. What do you think the pros and cons are of factionalism in the Liberal Party, let's say?
So factions exist, Dave. Let's not beat around the bush. They exist in the Liberal Party. They exist in the Labor Party. I'm more of a fan of the Labor Party factionalism, frankly. It's sort of a bit more defined, a bit more transparent. Look, factions do have their place. They are the reality of our political system. I would just love to see factionalism be based on ideas and beliefs rather than personality politics and power grabs. That would be the ideal factional system for me across any party. But they're there and they exist, and we'd be kidding ourselves not to acknowledge that they do.
Marika enjoins your answer to Pamela and says, the Libs in Victoria are filled with Marxists and faux conservatives. Politically educated and aware Christians need to help out and get in the game to keep the good guys there. P.S. Brad is a good egg.
Yeah, righto. I can't accept bribes. That's beyond me. So,
flattery works, though. Look, I want to flick to our other two panelists to answer this question from Evelyn Ray, another frequent panelist on Pellowe Talk. What would you say to people who want to make a difference but don't necessarily like everything that a party stands for? For example, the Liberal government in New South Wales allowed late-term abortion. Shane. Would I prefer Liberal over Labor? Yes, but I feel dirty signing up for a party that would allow such a horrendous act to be legal. Liz, how would you answer Eve?
Look, firstly, sympathetic to the question. But what I say to people, firstly, I encourage everyone to join a party. I don't even care which party. But right. So many people complain about, say, the Liberal Party. Let's use that as an example. And I have been a member of the Liberal Party for many years and was extremely involved. And what I used to say is, if there's something about it that you want to change, get in the game. It is a numbers game, as we've been talking about. So if you want to see a particular ideology, and like you've mentioned, Dave, we saw this happen over the past years with the left. They wanted to further a particular ideology, and that's what they've done through stealth, through our institutions, be it political, be it educational. It's the same. It's exactly the same in our political parties. If you get enough people of like minds and like hearts to get involved, as you were earlier encouraging Christians, sign up if there's a change that you want to see. Particularly with regard to abortion, to go back to the original question. In America, we've seen them take leaps and bounds in this area. Now, Australia hasn't nearly made as much progress, but in America, there is a huge anti-abortion voice now, and they're growing in power, and they're growing in vocalizing this. They've seen clinics shut down, and people are once again becoming alive to this issue. If that is a change that you want to see, if that is a voice that you want to make louder, then I would say you've just answered your own question. Get involved on a branch level, on a division level. People can put up motions about these things that make it all the way to state councils, state conferences, etc., and so on. And once you're involved in a party and learn the mechanisms and learn how it works, you can learn how to make it work for you. We live in a representative democracy. I talk about this till I'm blue in the face because so many Aussies don't make it work for them. And as Brad's been saying all evening, they're there to work for us. But so many everyday Australians don't quite understand the blessing of the system that we live in, and they don't make it work for them. And one of the key ways to do that is to sign up to a party. And parties, like I tell everyone, it's a bit like a church. You're never going to find the perfect church. You could spend your whole life church hopping around and still not find something that ticks every single box you're looking for. Parties are the same. Just you've got to be planted somewhere. You've got to be on the inside to make a difference. You've got to be in the system to change the system. And if you know the change that you want to see, you're already half there. Just sign up.
And of course, the other way to really get educated about the political system and the reality of issues in Australia is to faithfully, loyally, without failure, watch every episode of Pellowe Talk, right?
Absolutely.
Dan, what do you think? Feeling dirty to sign up for a party that has positions you really can't support, but may yet be the closest option available. What's your advice? What's your thoughts on that?
It's interesting. I look at Penny Wong, who, when during the Kevin Rudd ascendancy argued against same-sex marriage, and of course that was against her own conviction, but she, they were on the cusp of power. They were clearly on the rise at a federal level, the Australian Labor Party, and of course, when that same-sex bill was passed, she could speak quite freely on it. So that's a classic example of somebody, who probably who rightly or wrongly, you can challenge her on it, but in a way moved away from a deeply held personal position to fold in with the party line. And you'll never get perfection. Now I did for a long time, for a couple of years, I did the advocating on behalf of the business community here in Queensland. Sadly, there's politics, there's the periphery stuff, so the interest groups. I did that for a while, but the truth of the matter is if you actually want to affect change, you really have to be inside the tent, and you have to decide what your contribution is going to be. If there are things you disagree with fundamentally, but you can stomach most of it, then I think you should be involved, because there's nothing worse than the Monday morning quarterback. We've seen, for example, here in Queensland, opposition leader Deb Freckington, copped it from, has obviously copped it from head office somewhere, and you know, she could have folded, but she's chosen to fight, and, you know, more power to her. And so, you know, like, there are days which are brutal, but the thing is this: you have to stand up and be counted at some point in your life, no matter what it is. Yeah. You know, and I'd see all sorts of comments and people, and but did they have a crack? And, you know, and in life you have to have a crack. I'm reminded too, just for the panel, just that Sir Leo Hilscher, who the famed great under-treasurer here in Queensland, who basically started the coal industry and one of the architects for Sir Frank Moore of the new Bradfield scheme. He's 93, still working, but he's having a go. And that is what life is all about. So people who sit in the sidelines, we talk a lot about statues, and, you know, they're being desecrated, but I've never seen a statue of a critic yet. You know, so history's there for your own making.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that actually, the comment you made just then is, I guess, evidence of what I was saying before, and that these faceless men who are wielding the numbers and influence in a way that's not representative of the grassroots members is not something that's just exclusive to either Victoria or just to the Labor Party. We see David Hutchinson is basically digging in, and his moves to perhaps topple the opposition leader here in Queensland, Deb Frecklington, seem to have backfired spectacularly. Now, that may be to the credit of the LNP that these games were attempted and failed, but, you know, we've got this. Brad, you asked me what's going on in Queensland. Why are we toppling or you know, making moves against the LNP leader just months out from an election? And it's a really good question. The members are asking that as well, and they're asking the state president to answer that question. Why are these moves going on behind the scenes? Any further thoughts on that, Dan?
Well, I know Deb Frecklington not well, but I know her personally, and I'll tell you what. Like, I've observed politicians as a journalist and at close quarters, you know, state, federal, local, and Deb Frecklington's work ethic is absolutely off the chart. It's incredible, you know. She's got a great story to tell. I mean, I suppose I don't understand. You know, like, I think there's been there's been the criticism of her team in terms of their media performance, and, you know, given this is an area of speciality for me, I mean, I think they probably should be talking more in the economy. I think she put an op-ed on that out today. But like, there's been a perception about cut through for Deb Frecklington, but the bottom line is this: is she's got the LNP in a winnable position, and to go against your party leader who's put you in a winnable position. You know, now Dave Hutchinson's the person being, who's been the person who the people are speculating that it's him. I do think, given the fact that, you know, that's not a mistake, that his pitch is there, and I do think his position's untenable. But I have absolutely no understanding as to why you would be trying to axe a leader who is basically bringing in a fresh wave of new candidates, many female, many highly qualified females too, into your party with great economic record. The problem with state politics, of course, is incumbency is massive. But you've got a leader in Deb Frecklington who, to me, the strategy doesn't make any sense. And I'd say to the LNP, if it was me, you know, doing their numbers, or, you know, working on their media cut through, it's, again, you get behind the leader and you start attacking where there's weakness, and there's clearly weakness around the economy here in Queensland. And I think if anything, that's probably where they haven't gone where they should. But the idea of taking out a leader before an election who's in a winnable position with a united team makes absolutely no sense to me. Yep.
Liz, do you have any sense of the political landscape in Queensland from over there on the other side of the great continent of ours?
Just a bit. I'm actually relocating to Queensland next week. I was born a Queenslander, and most of my family's over there, actually. So I can't wait to put pedal to the metal
I think
and
you did
lead
tell
this
me you were
Labor government
relocating.
out. Yeah. So look, I agree. This does seem like a very confusing time to be trying to do this, but this isn't new. We see parties in opposition do this from time to time coming up to an election. They get cold feet and they start to think, well, would we have a better shot at getting government if we slap a different face on the front of this bus? Thankfully, it hasn't gone well, and we do still have Deb as leader of the LNP, as I think we should going to this election. Like you've mentioned several times now, it's just a few months away. And I too have heard differing reports about Deb's cut through. That seems to be the word that's used quite a bit about her, and rather lack thereof, depending on the public perception at the time. But we've got to make this about policy. And I think personality politics has just become far too big a thing these days. But if you look at policy, just downright policy, not everyone can be a Trump, getting around kicking everyone in the teeth, capturing the world's imagination. Indeed. But if you look at LNP policy compared to Labor policies, and indeed what Labor policies have done to the Sunshine State, if you look at the state debt, if you look at what they're doing currently, as we already discussed tonight, absolutely murdering businesses by the day now. Milking the state for all it's worth while they've only got 5 active cases. It's just absolutely dreadful. I hope they get voted out. I'll certainly be doing everything in my power to make it happen. And Queenslanders, I think they're smart enough to know this isn't about personality. This isn't even necessarily about the person who will or won't become premier. It's about the policies of the parties that you're voting for. Please, we beg of you, check them out before you vote.
Yeah, I don't know that she is having the cut through that she needs to or could have with a more aggressive attack on economics. There's a clearly economic case to be made about the incompetence of the current Labor government in Queensland. And I don't think Deb Frecklington's making it well enough. Certainly there's some big thinking, nation-building projects that are getting a mere occasional mention. And I do think there are alternative leaders to the party who probably could get more cut through. But on the other hand, when do opposition leaders get much cut through? It's nearly always the government's election to lose as opposed to the opposition's election to win by amazing political strategy. And you just can't change leaders this close to an election without a whole heap of liability and carnage behind. And so with the cost benefit of analysis of changing leaders to a better leader, well, I don't think the net benefit would actually be there. I think this has been a fool's errand. If you're going to do this, you should have done it a year ago. I think this is just an example of this backroom maneuvering, which exemplifies the reason why, to bring this full circle, we actually need a whole lot of natural immigration into these parties, Labor, Liberal, and the minor parties. Join the party that you would most normally vote for and make it better. Get better candidates in there and deny these backroom bully boys the opportunity to pull numbers as if they control the grassroots members like puppets on a string. They don't, and they shouldn't, because we should be independent thinkers and critically analysing and making up our own decision, as Brad has said, asking the public servants to serve the public. And that's exactly what minister and ministry means. It means service. Any further thoughts, Brad? I haven't asked you a question for a good 10 minutes now.
You're right, mate. I'm not as needy as as some of the other panelists you've had previously. Mate.
Stop digging.
Look, I just don't know. I just don't know why the Queensland LNP would be shooting themselves in the foot this close to an election which they can win. I mean, that just seems really dumb. It seems to me, from the far-flung regions of Victoria, not having much of a corporate knowledge, operating knowledge of the LNP in Queensland at all, really. I followed Deb when she was first elected opposition leader on her socials. From what I can see, she seems to be doing a really good job. She's certainly out there. She's certainly trying to sell her messages. And at the same time, you got a resignation of the Queensland Treasury. You got Anastasia Pellowe, who's locking up the borders. I mean, it's the LNPs to lose at this point, isn't it? So why play games at this point in time? Why play games at this point in time with, well, from at least this distance, no credible alternative? Playing games for the sake of games leads to more games, and that's what the public are sick of. The LNP administration, in my view, once again from the far-flung regions of Victoria, are doing their cause a disservice by seeking to be so political, so close to the cusp of an election victory.
I don't know that LNP has got this in the bag by any stretch. I don't even know that we're within reach.
I thought better of you, Dave. I thought better of you.
So the equation really is this, right? North of Gympie, Labor will be lucky to pick up a seat, right? It's in the southeast corner, which really, accounts for 85% of, increasingly, the economy and, the activity. Queensland's quite a decentralised state, but regionally speaking, they're gone. I mean, the obfuscation on the Adani project was the nail in the door of that. And, Brad raised a good point about Jackie Trad. I mean, if she had done what she'd done in the Joe era, her name would be in infamy for decades. So, this is kind of like, if you look at what the ministers in Joe eras went for, it was nowhere near what Trad did. But that's neither here nor there. Now, the bottom line is that it's the Labor stronghold is Brisbane, the city of Brisbane, in some ways similar to Melbourne, in terms of the LNP holds 8 of 40 seats in Brisbane. And the rest of their power comes from the Gold Coast, it comes from the regions. But the fact of the matter is that Anastasia Palaszczuk's hold on regional seats, they'll be lucky to pick up one seat, I'd say, in Townsville, where there's, there is one fairly strong Labor seat. But beyond that, I mean, they've done their political capital in every mining region there is. And, when she raced to Mackay was last year after the federal election, she did a lot of campaigning against the Morrison government, has been very political in terms of, prior to COVID, using the jingo line of, oh, we Queenslanders and all this, that's becoming a very tied, people are sick to death of the Peter Beattie playbook. And what will tend to be, where Labor's got their big problems, the fact it's not so much the LNP they're going to worry about, is the younger people are parking their votes with the Greens. And the ALP, again, have to fight a two-pronged war. They've lost the regions. Their big hope is holding Brisbane. But again, in holding Brisbane, they're going to be fighting three-cornered contests. So that's how difficult their challenge is. But the thing is, they've got to run on a record. $90 billion of sovereign debt is a terrible starting point. That's twice what the national average is for most state governments. The ratings agencies, if they mark you down, it doesn't matter who you are. You could be.
Do you think most Queenslanders care about the budget that much? Do you think they even understand that we've got such a terrible debt problem? I mean, they're like, I can't believe they were so easily manipulated over asset sales from a government that sold assets. I don't know that Queenslanders have the average economic intelligence to realise Labor's selling us up the river.
Well, the Liberal Party have also, committed not to doing asset recycling. Asset recycling is a part of what every state government should be doing. But, Dave, if I was to put this in really blunt terms, it costs $60 billion to run the state of Queensland. any given year, police, nurses, you name it, right? You're paying $2.5 billion now in interest alone. So you're getting upwards of 5% of your actual expenditure of what you need for essential services is actually for interest payments on debt. And if someone says to you in the electorate, why can't we have some more services out there? You go, well, look, you know what? We've got no money. And the fact is, if you look at Queensland's fiscal response to this COVID crisis...
And we won't open the borders. Got no money and won't bring it in.
No money, no economic activity. And you've got, you know, business confidence, which was already at shocking lows going into the COVID-19 crisis. Hostility towards the mining industry, which basically pays for the lot here in, you know, and for large parts of Australia. You've got problems, and you know, it's really, you know, like in terms of, you know, people can talk about, you know, Deb Frecklin and all that, but you know, ultimately, the gun sights are on government going into a third term. Can they deliver? Now they've got some very good ministers in Cameron Dick and Shannon Fentiman. You know, Jackie Trad, for all her detractors, was a fighter. You know, could really go for it. Now the thing is, Palaszczuk will have to go beyond folksy photo opportunities with the Hemsworths at the Gold Coast. And, you know, Kate Jones, that it doesn't cut it, and that's what their problem's going to be.
Yep. Now, you did mention that Labor's going to have to fight a two-pronged attack, and that's going to be one against the centre-right LNP, and the other is going to have to be against the likes of these people, the Greens, who don't mind defacing statues of Captain Cook and giving people a public job for it. We also have these people in their party. Greens activist Jonathan Peter Doig arrested over alleged child sex abuse offences. Has anybody heard any commentary from the Greens anywhere close to the level of vitriol expressed to members of the Catholic clergy who've been arrested and accused over child sex abuse offences?
I'll defer to the others, but I haven't, no.
No, Greens? Silence from the Greens on this? Would have thought they would have been out there making huge statements about how they're appalled by this, and that's got no place in their party at all.
Yeah, but this is what you get from the Greens, though, isn't it, Dave? You get all care and no responsibility. The truth of the matter is the Greens are never going to form government in any state or territory or nationally in this country. They will say whatever they can to try and get as much support as they possibly can from people who will frankly be sold a pup. That is the Greens. And Victoria, this is how we dealt with them ahead of the elections that have come and gone. We've let them fight out preference deals with the Labor Party. We've reserved our right about who we will preference in close seats until the very last minute. We've let the Labor Party throw resources at Green seats. We've let the Greens throw resources at Labor Party seats, and we've stepped out of the fray. There is another view and a counter view, and that is that Liberal Party should always say that we will always put the Greens last. So however you treat the Greens, I think the Greens should be treated with disdain because, frankly, their contribution to the Australian political process and our democracy is not even worth mentioning.
Now, we've got a question I'd like, I guess, to put to you, but I don't want to... Evelyn's excluded you from this, Dan. That's not very nice. Do you think it's possible, Brad and Liz, in our lifetime, for a political party such as One Nation to get voted in at an election, or is it just a dream? I assume you're talking, Evelyn, about forming government, because there's plenty of One Nation people that are elected individually, but for the party to get a majority of the votes, is that going to happen in our lifetime? Liz, you go first.
Look, it's really I can't see that happening. No, I'm sorry. I do think One Nation play a great part. And in many ways, particularly in Queensland, they are a voice that mainstream Australia, if you look at their following on Facebook, if you look at the traction that they get in some states, they are a voice that mainstream Australians want and need on the political scene. But in terms of winning government, no, I couldn't realistically see that happening, not only in my lifetime, but probably for quite a few lifetimes to come. Very, very glad to have them on backbenches in parliaments in Australia. I think they play a great part, and they say a great many things that many mainstream Australians are longing to hear and want to see their representatives say. So yeah, great part that they play, but sorry, can't see them holding government anytime soon.
Brad, promise to
Dave?
be as objective as you can in answering this.
Can you pull up that tweet again, Dave? I just want to give it one glance.
The tweet,
the contribution from Evelyn.
Oh, the comment. Okay.
Yeah, the comment. Sorry, mate.
Okay, Evelyn, where was it? Just scrolling. Here we go. Found it.
Oh, there we go. Or is it just a dream? Evelyn, I wish you better dreams in the future.
She didn't say it was her dream.
This is Brad's polite way of saying it's his nightmare, isn't it, Brad?
Look, I'm thinking, nice beaches, somewhere in the Pacific, maybe climbing a mountain, doing something nice for the family, a picnic, a bushwalk, something like that. But the One Nation holding the balance of power in a state or territory, no. Look, I do agree with Liz. I'd much prefer to have a member of One Nation on the crossbench than a rabid lefty, green or any other colour, because at least you can talk to them. At least they speak a similar language. At least there's more reason in their commentary than in the parties of the left. But can I see them forming government? I wish you better dreams, Evelyn.
Dan, what do you think about One Nation's fortunes in this lifetime, a lifetime after Pauline Hanson has handed over to Mark Latham?
Well, I think Mark Latham's got considerable intellect. I mean, he, large parts, particularly when he was in the Australian Labor Party, he wrote quite detailed and some excellent education policy, and I think he's actually probably one of the more considered thinkers currently, particularly in state politics in New South Wales. And so I think they would actually be, I think they'd actually enjoy much wider appeal with Mark Latham there. He does enjoy that very common, a great common touch. He is well read. He is highly intelligent. Probably a bit volatile at times. But that's part of his makeup. That's kind of probably a bit of the appeal of him too. So certainly there's a chance of a broader appeal beyond Pauline Hanson. But the thing with One Nation is that they have contested, election after election since 1996, and they certainly do have a place, very much so now. And the one thing they've done probably better than the national parties, especially, is they've really kind of, if anything, poor old Nats, One Nation stolen their thunder in some regard in terms of,
so true,
really prosecuting the issues for regional Australians. And we have to remember that regional Australians have some terrible health outcomes and education outcomes by virtue of the fact of where they live. So there's certainly a place for One Nation. I just don't think they would ever be able to get that broad support, particularly amongst urban Australians, to form, a majority government.
Yep. Well, let's wrap the show up. We'll start with ladies first and just give everybody 60 seconds to wrap up your thoughts for the evening. Just reminder to everybody, thank you for watching, and make sure you've shared this with your friends and subscribe to Pellowe Talk newsletters. Big news coming in the next week or two, certainly by the 1st of July, an amazing new initiative to launch. And the newsletter subscribers were told all about it today. But just stay tuned to this channel. It's going to be absolutely huge. Liz, your final thoughts for the evening.
Final thoughts for the evening. Look, I'd just say many people watching, I'm sure, are people who would consider themselves part of the silent majority. And as Advance Australia's spokesperson, I want to encourage people to stop being the silent majority and to start being a lot more vocal. One of the reasons why we're seeing the left take our monuments, our statues, our places of our different institutions all over Australia by storm is that we have been silent for far too long. So in your workplaces, in your places of study, even around the barbecue with mates, stop being silent. Be that dissenting opinion and don't give in to the game of intimidation of the left.
Brilliant. And Dan, just I'm actually going to go to Brad before you, but hang on. We got some good comments coming in. Evelyn, Brad might need to undo the top button on his shirt. He's holding back laughing so much. And Evelyn's also coming for you, Dan, on notice. Your 60 seconds has to include an explanation of the lamp. So Brad, your final thoughts. Anything you wanted to get out and couldn't get out tonight, Brad?
Oh, Dave, I just enjoyed the chat, mate, and it's great to be with some solid citizens. Finally, it's refreshing actually from the live from the Parliament of the People's Republic of Victoria to have some decent and thoughtful conversations about issues that matter to the lives of everyday Australians. Mate, I'm with Liz on this one. Look, if politics is not a spectator sport, if you are interested in making a contribution to your community, sign up. And I'd even go so far as to say, you know, it's not just the Liberal Party that needs conversion. It's the Labor Party. It's other political parties. Sign up and get involved, and don't just be a spectator that gets lost in the dustbin of history. Be part of history and work together to make your community a better place.
And a final endorsement from Evelyn Ray. You might give us some hope yet, Brad. And Dan, your final thoughts for the evening.
Well, this is the this is the androgynous boy which I bought for my wife. So I'm just taking the arm off there too.
Are you still married, Dan?
It does have challenges, but no, Dave.
The lamp or your marriage?
Sorry, I shouldn't have clapped in the microphone.
I love my wife, and I love to complain in the strongest possible terms about those comments about me. But no, just as always, Dave, thank you so much for the opportunity to have a chat. I just think that like good discourse and the ability to talk about ideas is it's always refreshing, and I loved hearing from Brad and Liz tonight. And I think they got some great perspectives. And again, being part of the political process and making a stand, no matter what it is so much better. We're enriched as people and as a country when we do so. So, and I really appreciate the comments too, and people asking great questions. So, as always, a big thank you to the panelists tonight. And Dave, I'll tell you what, I'd have you over Hamish and Tony Jones any day of the week. You're fantastic. So, thank you so much for having me.
It's very generous of you. Thank you very much. And a big thank you to all the panelists for joining us tonight. And repeat that encouragement from Dan that, we can't do this show without you. To be half as much fun without the comments coming in and some good laughs and some good thought-provoking things as well. But let me encourage you to become a partner of Pellowe Talk. This isn't a part-time gig. This is all I do. That's not 100% true. I do have to do some other stuff on the side to make some money, but this is easily 95% of my week. And your support just helps me keep doing it. And as I've said a couple of times tonight, hinting, you want to sign up to those newsletters at davepellowe.com because there's really big announcement coming very, very soon. And you don't want to miss out on that. And it's going to be very, very great. More and more conversations like this is the hint. We're going to be building a bigger platform, which will be all about unity and not uniformity. Very important, very similar, but yet profound differences between unity and uniformity. So it's been fantastic having you all along tonight. Let's see what the latest comments are. Good talk. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Liz, David, and especially Brad from the Dear Leaders People's Republic of Victoriastan. Enjoyed all the commentary and great panelists tonight. So thank you very much, everyone. Good night, and thank you for joining Pellowe Talk. We'll see you in the comments. Make sure you share it. Bye.
Bye.